Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about a subject that is of paramount importance. And let me point out right now before I actually get into this article and start talking about this particular topic, but it doesn't just affect baby boomers and millennials. This is the thing that, and I've pointed this out in past videos, this is the thing that shocks me actually. It's the fact that Generation X, which represents I think it's about 22% of the population of Canada, so substantial, not a majority by any stretch of the imagination, right? We're actually a smaller cohort than our boomer parents or the millennials, the generation that comes after us. But, we still represent millions of Canadians, right? But every time you hear about topics that pertain to economics or social engineering or politics in this country, the only two demographic segments of this society that you really hear about are the boomers and the millennials. Boomers and the millennials. And like I said in past videos, a major contributing factor to that is probably because the boomer generation, those that chose to go into professional careers or politics, right? Or big business, right? Or any of these professional type careers, they waited till much later to have their kids. So they actually ended up having kids that were millennials. But they seem to forget that, there's a whole segment of that demographic, the boomers, that had their kids on a normal timeline in their teens and early 20s that actually raised another generation called Generation Xers. People like myself, right? They seem to just skip over, and I suppose it has to do with the fact, like I've suggested in past videos, probably has to do with the fact that the kind of people that they surround themselves would be people of like mind and of people of the same particular kind of social construct that waited till much later. So they seem to, like I say, if you just surround yourself with a bunch of boomers that had their kids late in life in their 30s or 40s, their kids are all millennials. So to them, what are you talking about, Gen X? There's no such thing to them, right? The next successive generation, as far as they're concerned, are the millennials. So that's why they seem to skip completely over. But those in the private sector, those who aren't part of the ruling class or the pundit class, right? Or the part that want to socially engineer everything, right? Do this authoritarian approach to everything that has to do with their social, political, or economic lives. They seem to completely skip over the fact that there's a whole generation of millions of us in this country. And this article is just further proof of that reality. The headline is, New report warns that Ontario must change its fiscal ways. If the province doesn't raise taxes or cut spending soon, the Financial Accountability Office says the debt burden will fall to millennials. Really? Well, what about the Gen Xers? Like I say, they just completely skip over the fact, and this was published on October 19th, 2017 by Sarah Reed. But Sarah, are you one of these people? What's up with it? Well, why do you leave a whole generation out of this equation? Which, in reality, the most hardships, the most detrimental aspects of this social engineering and economic central planning, the ones that are suffering the most from all this, and the ones that will actually be forced to pick up the tab and the bill for all this, at this stage of the game, are the Generation Xers. Because those are the ones that are actually out there that are providing the most services for everyone in society, right? It's Gen Xers, because we're of that age range between, being in your 30s or 40s that are out there literally doing all the hard work as far as creating and sustaining economic growth properly, the kind of proper economic growth that actually benefits everyone. Not social engineering economic growth, not speculative economic growth, not government mandated economic growth, but out there doing all the hard work. The ones that are making sure that you got power, right? When you turn on your light switch, and you got power, the ones out there that are actually paving the roads, those roads, right, that you always talk about. All these things that you take advantage of and go through your daily lives, not even recognize the fact that all this stuff happens seamlessly because there are people out there working hard in the private sector, not in the public sector. Not the parasitical class, not the parasitical types, but the ones that are actually doing the hard work to maintain economic prosperity for so many people. Boomers are now at the latter stages of that, right? A lot of them are either retired, semi-retired, or on that precipice. So when you look out there today and you recognize, hey, the economy hasn't crashed, well, you can thank Gen Xers for that, for carrying that additional burden on top of all the other burdens that have been placed on them from their boomer parents for all these decades. We are the ones that are doing the heavy lifting and all the hard work at this particular time. It's not the millennials, and as sure as shit aren't the majority or even a bulk of the boomer cohorts. An aging population will make it difficult for Ontario to handle its debt and budget challenges over the next 35 years, according to a new report from the province's financial accountability offices. Over the next 3 decades, Ontario will experience major shifts in its population and the economy as the large baby boom cohort transition from work into retirement and eventually into old age, said David Wake. The temporary financial accountability office at press conference at Queen's Park on Thursday, without significant changes to Ontario's fiscal policy, the FAO's projections suggest that the province will face substantial long-term budgetary challenges. But let me just say, the baby boomers that work for government, and I have many of them in my own family, so I'm just going to tell you the reality of the facts here, folks, okay? Now, it's only anecdotal, but I know, it's not just me that I'm referencing for the source. So it's many of us of Generation X that have witnessed this personally with their own eyes, right? In my own family, those who work for government, as soon as they hit 55, they retired. Because that's the promise that working for the government, being loyal subjects, serfs, and slaves to the ruling class, they have given them, the ability to retire 10 years earlier than those of us in the private sector. And with gold-plated pensions, which is on top of all the other entitlements that they gain along their 3+ decades or so now of being in those positions of power or so-called authority, right? So these people, a lot of them have already moved on into retirement and are enjoying the shit out of their lives at this stage of the game, and kind of sitting back and laughing at how the rest of us are having to wade through all this fucking bureaucratic bullshit and big government that they created, that they benefit from directly. The report is the FAO's first long-term budget outlook, and it contains strong warnings for this and future Ontario governments about the province's fiscal position. Baby boomers will put huge pressure on budgets. The number of seniors in Ontario will rise significantly over the next 35 years, reaching 5 million by 2050, about twice the current number. The majority of baby boomers, though, will have retired long before then. By 2030, the report notes, Ontario's working age population will have fallen to 60% of the general population from 68 in 2016. The steady departure of baby boomers from the workforce will contribute to slower economic growth over the next 15 years. More moderate growth in the economy will limit the growth of Ontario's revenues, said David West, the FAO's chief economist. At the same time, the aging baby boom cohort will place greater demands on Ontario's healthcare system, increasing the pressure on government spending. The province will also see lower population growth. By the mid-2040s, the death numbers will outnumber births. The report says that eventually migration will be the sole driver of population growth in Ontario. Well, once again, that's just another contributing factor and a direct result of this kind of social engineering, right? And tearing apart family units, right? If we still lived under the system of promoting family units instead of fucking giving people the ability to use the power of the state as a means to wealth redistribute and allow single parents, single mothers in particular, to just step out and onto their own without actually having to be personally responsible or personally accountable economically or financially, this wouldn't have played out to this degree. You wouldn't have seen this culmination and this effect at this particular junction. But like I said, social engineering and economic planning has brought us to this point, but rather than correct their mistakes or accept the fact that they will have to suffer, the baby boomer cohort should suffer as a consequence of their stupidity, of their bad behaviors, of their bad decisions, no, they'll just paint over it by forcing, they don't expect the Gen Xers to take care of them because they recognize, they burned those bridges long ago. So they're hoping the millennials will, which is once again why in this article, and I'll place a link to it in the description of the video below, but I don't have to read anymore. But if you read through this article, you'll recognize the same thing that I did when I read through the entire thing. No mention of Gen X whatsoever, or the fact that it's actually us that are going to be stuck foot in the bill for not just our fucking parents, the boomer generation, or the greater generation, those of us, those who are still left living off the doles of all these public expenditures or these social safety nets or entitlements, but even the millennials that now seem completely unwilling to assume any roles, tasks, or responsibility, of actually being efficient and hard-working members of society. They don't seem to want to have anything to do with it. So I think everything's going to be laid upon the shoulders of Gen X once again. And I hope the rest of you in Gen X, start to read some Ayn Rand. Start to understand what the term Atlas Shrugged means, right? Because there's going to come a day where you might recognize that you too are going to have to do that shrug and be like, yeah, not taking care of everybody. I'm not a sacrificial lamb for everyone else. I'm not a slave. I'm not a subject. I'm not a serf for everyone else. I am an individual and I demand respect. It's Canadian Libertarian. I love liberty.